G'day, mate. 40 here. You notice there's something disturbingly similar about a lot of these school shooters? You've probably heard of the phrase physiognomy is destiny. Well, it's not something that you can establish definitively because academics are strongly discouraged from investigating these topics. All right, there are all sorts of commonsensical topics that people in academia are discouraged from following. For example, does nature color code things for our advantage? Right, people color coded for our advantage. All right, you see color coding throughout nature. You can just tell at a glance whether or not someone's likely to be on your side. You can get a sense of how fast they might be or how dangerous they might be just by a glance. But these are not things that you can study. We do know from when it was more socially acceptable to study murderers and their physiognomy that murderers tend to have a disproportionate amount of facial scars. Right? We know that people with schizophrenia are about 20 times more likely than the general population to commit murder. So getting a good idea of what people are more likely to commit murder seems like a good idea for me. I am all for profiling. Religious profiling, ethnic profiling, racial profiling, physiognomy profiling, if it's accurate, right? There are generalizable stereotypes that tend to be true. For example, men commit a lot more murders than women, that old men commit a lot fewer murders than young men, that certain racial groups commit more murders or fewer murders than other racial groups. So if you've got a relatively small population that's committing a disproportionate amount of crime, why would you not take that into account? And so I am all for studying physiognomy. For example, is it really destiny?
That shot because it was so easy. And lastly, why do all these motherfucking shooters look like him? It's almost prerequisite before you sign up to become a shooter. Ugly, check. Sexless, check. Bullied in school, check. He was actually apparently called the school shooter at school as a joke. It's written all over him. We need to start some sort of program to get these dateless wonders a shag. Maybe we get them a prostitute or whatever. They can experience a woman and realize there's more to life. Maybe it is worth living. If I go and kill all these people, I'm gonna lose that. So maybe I won't. Because if he'd experienced sex, maybe none of this would ever have happened. But there's no way he did. Look at him, bless him. Burning in hell as we speak. I'm sorry, I'm not feeling sorry for this guy. He didn't just try and kill Trump, he killed an innocent fireman who was actually protecting his family at the time and literally lost his life doing so. Fuck this.
Yeah, so we should not just try to provide sex for ugly people and the socially awkward people, but we should be investigating, are there clues in people's physiognomy, are there things in people's physiognomy that provide helpful hints about a whole range of human behavior, not just are they about to go on some kind of murderous
Alex
rampage.
Jones has got a lovely garden. I'm not sure how much longer he's going to have it for with the lawsuit and whatnot, but bloody lovely that. Just thought I'd mention it.
Trump should be in a bunker at this point.
Okay, I think we've heard enough from Alex Jones there. There's also a Green Beret sniper had something to say about this, and these guys are highly trained, so it's worth listening.
Anywhere the president's going to go, there are teams from the Secret Service that go out days, if not weeks, if not months, before the president will ever be at that spot. And they do a site security assessment. And they do that with the local police forces and agencies to ensure that every potential security threat or vulnerability is secured and, of course, protected against. Now, this is done way before Donald Trump will ever get there, and they know every place that the president will be, and the sniper team especially is responsible for ensuring that no one can take a shot at the president. Now, that does not mean that the sniper team just sets up with their guns and scans the crowd and shoots. No, what they do, the most important thing they do pre-Donald Trump showing up, is within a 360-degree environment of that podium of the president, they ensure that there is not a place that is open that will be accessible by someone with a rifle to take a shot at the president. So they make sure those places are barricaded off, inaccessible, and heavily guarded, so there is no way you are going to get to the place where you can even shoot the president with a rifle before the president shows up. Then they scan the crowd and those places with the rifle just in case by some miracle you do. Now, you're not going to tell me, I don't care who you are, don't listen to the media, nonsense anyways. I think most of us know that by now. That some 20-year-old kid that looks like he played Dungeons and Dragons in his mom's basement is trained on a gun, especially a sniper rifle like that, is a registered Republican, and then can access anywhere near the vicinity of that crowd, of that event, with him not dressed in a uniform and that sniper rifle. He was wearing American flag t-shirt and pants, and he had a rifle.
This guy's making a lot of sense right now.
Tell me that that kid went through all this levels of security, somehow got into the closest building to the president, then accessed the rooftop of the closest building to the president, then had the time to unpack his rifle, lay down in the prone, and then take 5 to 8 well-aimed shots at the president before he was decisively engaged by the Secret Service's counter sniper teams or a local police department. I don't know who they were. Most likely police. You're going to tell me all that happened and a 20-year-old kid did that?
That makes a lot more sense. The idea that it's an inside job seems far more likely now that I'm hearing all this, and I'm really digesting how insanely impossible it should have been for this kid to get away with all of that. It's either that the Secret Service are the worst, most insanely incompetent security team of all time, which we know they're not supposed to be, or it was an inside job. And with everything that there was to gain from blowing Donald Trump's head off just for the Ukraine money alone, it does feel more likely that it was an inside job. But I'm always open-minded. And strangely, the head of the Secret Service, that woman that we had on the last episode about this, where she was going on about how she wants to increase females in the Secret Service, and that's her goal, said that the reason they didn't put anyone on the rooftop was because the angle of the roof was too dangerous. Bearing in mind, it was like that. It wasn't like this. It wasn't even that much of a steep angle, and it was perfectly fine for that scrawny little 20-year-old bitch to get up there. You mean to tell me these big soldiers would be too scared to do that? Or was unsafe, was it? Well, I'm glad you took the safe option. Well,
yeah, that was just a ridiculous comment by the female head of the U.S. Secret Service, that because the roof was mildly sloped, they couldn't put a sniper up there. David, who's from Iran, talking with Piers Morgan.
The assassination attempt is when? When is the RNC? What did they want to do? Did they want there to be shambles before the RNC? Did they want right now at the RNC where the energy is high, the confidence is high? Was this intentional? Oh, it's Iran. Iran was really behind this and trying to get everybody to look this way instead of, why don't we investigate what the Secret Service got wrong? I think they're going to do whatever they can the next 112 days or whatever days are left to make sure he doesn't get in there.
The language on both sides has to be dialed down.
We're living in an unsafe world, and I'm not going to apologize to somebody sitting across the pond about our Second Amendment. And
other people took it as a veiled threat. The clear implication is, don't muck around with me, I'll shoot you. Former President Donald Trump came within an inch of his life last weekend. What kind of a country would America now be if he hadn't looked the other way? His running mate, J.D. Vance, is an America First absolutist who backs Israel but wants no more aid to Ukraine. What's the strategic play behind his appointment? Trump says he'll now be a unifying force, but is he capable of doing that? Or will President Biden still be the Democratic nominee in November? My next guest is a big dog with big opinions on all the big questions. Returning to Uncensored, the Valuetainment founder and host of PBD podcast, Patrick Bet-David. Great to have you back, Patrick.
Okay, so it's useful to ask, like, who benefits from a Trump assassination? Obviously, Joe Biden and the Democrats would benefit. I can't think of any group that would benefit more. That doesn't mean then that they deliberately set it up, but did they give off cues that enabled people in the Secret Service to think, oh, it'd be a good idea to put on the Secret Service team those who are particularly incompetent, those having a tough time? And I noticed this common pushback by people in my YouTube comments that Donald Trump, the Trump team, chooses the Secret Service security team. I guarantee you that the Trump team did not choose that obese woman who, when the shots ran out, was cowering behind Donald Trump and couldn't holster her pistol. Right? I guarantee you the Trump team didn't choose her. I guarantee you the Trump team didn't choose several of the key Secret Service agents at Saturday's event. So I just don't believe it.
Great. How you doing?
Well, you know what? I feel a little bit discombobulated. I feel like there's a lot going on in the world and has been now for a sustained period of time. You know, we had the pandemic, we had war in Ukraine, we've had war in Gaza, we've had cost of living crisis sweeping the world, and now we have the attempted assassination, a very nearly successful attempted assassination of a man who was president of the United States only several years ago and may well be again. It's all disconcerting, isn't it? What was your reaction when you heard about what had happened to Donald Trump?
You know, it's one of those days, like when I was sitting at Seasons 52 in Plano, Texas, when I heard that Kobe Bryant died, and nobody believed it. I'm like, what are you talking about? You know, we're sitting there and I get the news. We're coming back from watching a movie, Fly Me to the Moon, in the Hamptons, and we're with our family. And then all of a sudden, Vinny says, Pat, somebody shot Trump's ear. I said, what? And then we pull up the video. Nobody believes it. And then that's when all the commentary comes out. And we did a video about it and reacting to it. But I mean, obviously, blown away for that to be taking place, but at the same time, not surprised, because we've been talking about this for the last 12 months, where I said the most important thing with the president right now is protection. The most important. You have to make sure you quality control the people that you're relying to protect you. There's a reason why Messi has a specific person that protects him that's above and beyond whatever, you know, Inter Miami may offer him. So you can't just rely on Secret Service to do their jobs. I think you need to go above and beyond, especially knowing that the Secret Service director is a Secret Service of the existing president, who has had the DOJ go after you, who has tried to silence you. What makes you think they're going to fully give you their best people to protect you? Yeah, I would be a little bit more paranoid than the team was.
So Donald Trump met with the female head of the U.S. Secret Service on Tuesday. I wonder what that conversation was like.
You know, it's interesting. I got into this with Cenk Uygur yesterday. We got very agitated when I said I found what happened very odd. And he immediately started lambasting me as a conspiracy theorist. And
Right. So let's say you have no particular agenda. You're not particularly political. You're not particularly partisan. You just look at the facts on the ground. Would not the human mind naturally incline towards thinking this is an inside job rather than just grotesque levels of ineptitude by the U.S. Secret Service? Now, I think it's likely, right? I think it's likely that when the facts come out, we'll just find out that it was grotesque levels of incompetence by the U.S. Secret Service. But given what we know right now, I think for someone who's nonpartisan and just looking at the facts as we know them right now, the mind would naturally incline towards this was a setup. This was some kind of an inside job. I'm not saying that is the correct position. I'm not saying that's the factual position. Not saying that's the responsible position. I'm saying that's the natural human response to an event like this. And I am about as anti-conspiracy thinking as you can get in a right-wing dissident live streamer, right? I spend 100 times more time bashing what I regard as factless conspiracy theories, right? And the real meaning of conspiracy theory, as the phrase is used, it is a theory for which all the evidence goes against it, but people hold to it anyway, such as that 9/11 was an inside job. I haven't considered that for a second. Right? I don't believe that John F. Kennedy was killed by the CIA, which something that Tucker Carlson, among the many ridiculous and reckless things he claims. So I am not inclined towards conspiracies. Right? This is the first time that we've had an event go down, and when I look at the facts and the hours and the days go by and the information comes in, I think more and more that right now it just feels like an inside job. Not claiming it is. I'm saying you got to, it's very important to be true to the facts. It's important to be responsible. It's important to take notice of the effect of your words on other people. There is also an importance to reality and authenticity and to simply noticing how the human mind works. And people's who don't have a strong agenda either way, right? Their thinking is going to naturally incline towards inside job right now. And I will welcome evidence that destroys that argument. I will embrace that. I will be glad for it. But here's Patrick Bet-David.
Saying the Secret Service were in on it and all this kind of thing. I said, no, I'm not saying any of those things. Here's what I'm saying very clearly. It is incredibly strange to me and inexplicable that a 20-year-old kid with an AR-15 can clamber onto the roof in full view of the public, who start alerting authorities as much as 2 minutes before he fires this gun, and then gets to the perfect vantage point to shoot Donald Trump from 150 meters. And the fact he's able to let off 8 rounds, even with snipers all apparently looking at him at the time. Again, all of this is very odd, as is the fact that once he was taken down by the Secret Service, who did react very quickly to their credit, they then allowed him to stand back up. And they put a female agent in front of him who was clearly a lot shorter than he was, thereby exposing his whole head and upper torso to potentially a shot from another shooter had there been one. Rather than doing what they did with Reagan, for example, when they rushed him straight into the limo and got rid of him and took him to hospital. None of this makes sense to me. It really is an inexplicable chain of events that Donald Trump, who is one of the most threatened people in American public life, who's been president and is likely to be again, is at a public presidential rally months before an election, and any of that chain of events is able to happen.
Right, that's a pretty good summary there from Piers Morgan. Mark Halperin says, multiple sources outline the apparent state of play on Joe Biden. Plans to announce withdrawal from nomination as early as this weekend, with Sunday most likely. John Meacham, Joe Biden's journalist, historian friend, is polishing up remarks. Biden will not resign the presidency. He will not endorse Kamala Harris. There'll be an open convention with Harris and about 3 others. Superdelegates will not be allowed to vote on the first ballot. Kamala Harris is vetting at least 4 possible running mates, including Andy Beshear, the Democrat governor of Kentucky, and possibly Josh Shapiro. So Mark Halperin is the best political reporter in the country. His live streams early in the morning and at 3 in the afternoon Western time are absolutely essential. We'll keep an eye on that story.
Pierce, we were a half an inch away from civil war. We were a head not turning this way from a civil war. We've all seen the videos. And by the way, there is nothing wrong with questioning anything. One of the videos we showed is a reporter going around in California asking people, what do you think about the assassination attempt on the president? And everybody this person asked in California, everybody said, oh, it was a setup.
Well, I'll tell you what, Patrick, let me stop because we actually have that. Let me play that so that viewers know what you're talking about.
Sure, go for it.
Oh, it's a false flag.
False flag.
Yeah, false flag.
Somebody died and 2 people injured. What do you think about that?
False flag.
False flag.
I thought it was magnificently staged. It was professionally done.
Wait. Staged by who?
Oh, by Mr. Trump, of course.
I think this whole thing is staged.
No.
Please don't. We're so anti-Trump. I don't even want to.
Was it a bad thing, though? Was it a bad thing? Would you condemn it?
Oh, that he got shot at? Of course.
Yeah.
Was it staged? Probably.
1 person died in the crowd, 2 critically injured. What happened there?
Small price. It wouldn't matter to Trump. Do you think he cares if people die for him to be elected? Put a little scratch on his ear, threw a little blood on his face.
Now, so you think that they planned from 130 yards away to shoot off the corner of his ear?
And they never shot off the corner of his ear. That was all done by the people hanging around him.
What about the people that died what about the father that died in the stand as well as the others that were critically injured?
I don't know. I can't tell.
What would you say our reasoning is for saying that, or we have no reasoning?
Just the feeling.
If Trump is involved, it's a fraud.
I mean, it's staggering to me to hear that. And yet I had first-hand experience in the UK from various people that I encountered within 24 hours of what happened, immediately saying to me, because they recognized me and knew I'd been covering this, they said, this thing's staged, right? This was all set up. And I was like, what are you talking about? Of course it wasn't.
Okay, looking at Kamadov making interesting comment from Twitter. He's not getting censored nearly as much on Twitter, so you can watch this live right now on Rumble, on DLive, and on Kick, and on X. And Kamadov says, the suggestion that if only the shooter had experienced sex, even in a shallow and vapid form as a prostitute, he might not have resorted to such extreme behavior was simplistic. Yeah, but how likely is it that it's true? Right? For many people, for many men, sex is a top 3 joy in life. For many women, it's a top 3 joy in life. It adds purpose. So one thing I guarantee you, we will find out about the shooter, and that is he was attached to something, right? You cannot live without attachments. If you're not able to attach to people, you'll attach to drugs, to video games, to pornography, to fantasy fiction, right? You have to be devoted to, you have to be attached to something. It's just, and I have struggled with loneliness, all right, or too often in my life. So I feel a little bit of kinship with the outcasts of society, and I recognize that human need to feel important. When I read Lee Harvey Oswald's story, I recognize how badly he wants to feel important, that he wants to matter, that he wants to be a world historical character. And so you have to attach to something. We will find out what Crooks was attached to. there is an incredible cartoon that really gets to the nub of things.
The only building in front of the stage. Ah, that building. Maybe. Maybe not. How maybe not? You think it's necessary? I see a guy moving on the roof. Ah, the usual guys. Boss is very suspicious. He might be doing a parkour. He's lie down flat on his stomach. He's probably resting after doing parkour. He's looking towards Trump. Maybe the Trump fan tried to get a better view of him. Okay, he's pulled out a rifle. A rifle. Definitely a rifle. Can you tell if it's a real rifle? How I know if it's real? Maybe it's fake, and we are worrying for nothing. It's a real rifle. Very strange. Boss, awaiting your orders. Do you see any clay pigeon shooting devices? I don't think he's practicing shooting clay pigeons. We need to be sure, Frank. Boss, now he's aiming towards Trump. Can you see his expression? What expression? His facial expression. He seems to be mad. I don't know, boss. Or is he looking at him admirably? I can't tell. Maybe it's just using the rifle scope to get a better look. Boss, if we don't act now, he will shoot him. Stay calm, Frank. I don't think. He's shooting, boss. Holy cow. He's still shooting. What do I do? Are you sure you don't see any clay pigeons around? No clay pigeons. All right, in that case, fire a warning shot immediately.
All right,
we couldn't have known, Frank. We did everything we could. Some things are just unpredictable. An attack on a presidential candidate and a guy shooting. This is not the U.S. I know.
All right, that is a brilliant cartoon.
Set up, but trying to make them understand it was real was pretty much impossible.
But here's what I don't have a problem with. I don't have a problem with them saying that. I'm okay with that, and put that as a possibility that it was staged. Now, the possibility of being staged may be 0.1%, but we ought to put it out there as maybe this is possibility. Fine, give your argument. But at the same time, I have a lot of questions just like you do. The story that came out with the second shooter, the story that came out with the FBI power washing all the stuff on the top of the building after the shooter was gone, and maybe they don't have any residual effects of the shots fired. Maybe there's no residual effects. That's not a hard thing for us to find. They found the phone. You mean to tell me you didn't find anything in the phone on what was being said? We can't expect why the Secret Service, when I go online and I Google President Joe Biden's Secret Service team and go to images, try to find one female, that's one of his, you will not be able to find it. I went online and looked at all his team. Everybody is a white male. I thought President Biden was about DEI and, underrepresented. How come he doesn't have a single person that's transgender or lesbian, gay? How come he doesn't have somebody from that community representing him? And forget about that. Why is it that every one of his Secret Service members are white male, let alone for Trump, when they're being pushed into it? 3, 4, 5 of them were women. This is an area where DEI is being exposed in ways that we just got a story yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't have a problem with women in the Secret Service. They just have to be as good as the men, right? And they have to be up to the job. What was pretty horrifying was the agent that you saw, who's unfortunately for her gone viral, who can't even put a gun in a holster in that environment. And you're like, how on earth have you got into the Secret Service? This is like supposed to be the absolute elite of the elite of protection people in the world, and she can't put a gun in a holster twice as she's trying to protect a president who's just been shot.
But think about it from this way. Many, many years ago, when I'm running an office and I had 100 agents that are selling insurance, and one of my agents would come in and say, I have a family member that wants me, got a very complicated financial situation. Their net worth is $10 million. Can you have somebody come and sit down with them? I would choose who I would send to go meet with a family that is the biggest expert in our office that knows how to handle a situation like that, right? I choose how to match up the right agent advisor with the right appointment. The director of Secret Service has the ability to match up the best agents who are the most experienced one against the person that's attracting the biggest audience, which is President Trump. You ought to send the right people to protect. Why did you not? By the way, this is the same person that in 2022, when asked about the text exchange between the Bidens during J6, all of a sudden she's like, oh, the text exchange disappeared. We lost it. But look, we're not trying to do anything, that's negative, or we're not trying to hide anything from the public. So I have a very hard time. And every one of these questions need to be asked because it's a little bit disturbing when all these stories are coming up. By the way, specifically when? So let's actually think like the devil's advocate. Let's actually think if they were trying to do something, something negative or something that, manipulative to kind of hurt the president. So the judge comes out and says, we're going to pick what's going to happen to the president a few days before RNC, July 11th. Okay, no problem. They changed the dates. No problem. The assassination attempt is when? When is the RNC? What did they want to do? Did they want there to be shambles before the RNC? Did they want right now at the RNC where the energy is high, the confidence is high with who they have chosen as their nominee, which is Trump, and you see a unification coming up. Nikki Haley got up there. DeSantis got up there. Vivek got up there. Elon Musk just said he's going to get $45 million a month to a super PAC before now and the end of the year. Bunch of billionaires are coming out there. Conversations with a Jamie Dimon, conversations with an RFK, the video that was leaked. You know how bad this is for the DNC? If the same person, the same folks that are saying this was staged, we ought to also ask, was this intentional to do it right before the RNC? That question should also be on the table.
I just think all questions are perfectly...
Right, a lot of good questions. Let's see what Mike Benz has to say.
The executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online. Mike, thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks, Kara.
Okay, so the big question about Secret Service now is why didn't they have someone securing the roof that the shooter used? And Cheadle says, you know, the new excuse now is that it was too sloped to have snipers on, but it's pretty flat compared with the actually sloped roof that the Secret Service shot the would-be assassin from. So what's going on here?
That doesn't check out at all. I mean, it's comical. It is so insulting as to be absolutely enraging. She should be fired for that statement alone. A less than 10-degree slope is sufficient to have the literal nearest elevated surface to the podium be completely unguarded. Add that to the fact that we now have reports that the shooter was spotted and police were warned 26 minutes in advance of the shots being fired. Then you have, you know, it may be perhaps somewhat understandable that the sniper did not want to necessarily open fire if they didn't identify that it was a, you know, long-range rifle able to take that shot. But how did no one warn the president? How did no one, when they had 26 minutes advance of somebody up on that roof, did they not say, Mr. President, we're going to delay, you're going to have to step off the stage until we can secure an unknown potential assailant on literally the nearest elevated surface to the podium? But frankly, there's a much darker picture here that's beginning to be sketched out, and we don't know the depth of it yet, or whether this is indeed a lone gunman or there is something larger afoot. But the fact is the Secret Service has unanswered questions that it must answer for. Dating back to January 6th, it was the Secret Service who was supposed to be protecting Kamala Harris at the DNC building. And lo and behold, the pipe bomb that at the building, that their VIP, they were supposed to have done advance. They were supposed to scour the area. The pipe bomb was literally, as we're told, sitting on the leg of the nearest park bench on the DNC building premises to the entrance to the building. You could walk right on the street, have coffee on that bench. And the idea that the Secret Service missed that and then wiped all of their phone communications, which Kim Cheadle said, oh, that's, you know, oopsie. It was just a data migration, nothing to see here. Meanwhile, the FBI on top of the investigation has not identified probably the most dangerous man or woman. We don't know the age. We don't know the race. We don't know anything, not a single skin cell, hair follicle. Not a single footprint has basically been detected of this person who spent 90 minutes walking on foot through the national security state's home court of Capitol Hill. And the Secret Service wiped out all their texts. We don't know whether or not there was a rogue person within Secret Service who allowed that bomb to be planted, given the fact that the FBI cut off the stationary camera before the pipe bomber opens the bag to take the bomb out. So we don't even know if it's the same device. Frankly, there should be an entire subcommittee beyond just weaponization of government, but specifically the corruption of federal law enforcement, from FBI to DHS and specifically Secret Service within that, because we are now at a point where our federal law enforcement is so corrupt that we need a totally parallel, independent investigation and prosecutorial means outside of these corrupt channels.
That we do. And, you know, looking at the DNC pipe bomb as well, I dare and be.
Okay, let's get Fox News with an update on the shooter.
I can't wait either.
I can feel it. All right, Clay, thank you very much. Kaylee, thanks as well. Fox News alert. We're getting more details about the would-be Trump assassin, Thomas Crooks. Secret Service sources say that Crooks didn't arrive at the rally with a gun. He cased the venue earlier and stashed the gun in advance. The Secret Service missed it during their security sweep, if they even did one at all. A Trump rally volunteer who's attended dozens of rallies tells Fox he warned organizers about security oversights the night before the shooting. Watch this.
We did a walkthrough at 7 p.m. on Friday night, and we raised multiple concerns with the state GOP staff about parking, about security issues we saw, where there were lack of barricades at, and all of our safety concerns that we brought up on Friday evening were strictly turned down, and there was no answers given to any of our questions. or concerns about security in that matter. You know, we always saw the change in place the day of the rally, and this was the first one that I saw no changes made from Friday night to Saturday morning when we got there at 7:30.
We also confirmed that an FBI investigator hosed off the rooftop where the assassin fired from. Sources tell Fox it's not standard operating procedure for the FBI to handle cleanup at crime scenes. The FBI preserves crime scenes, and when the investigation moves into a different phase, private contractors are hired to clean up. Nothing about Saturday's incident makes any sense. First, Crooks had a van that police towed away. Then he had a Hyundai Sonata at the scene, and now we hear he rode a bike to the rally. A bike, a car, a van? Which one is it? His house is an hour away. Doesn't add up. Also, the New York Times is reporting that 5 days before the rally, Secret Service designated the building the shots were fired from as an observation post to watch the crowd, but decided not to watch the building itself, creating a massive blind spot within rifle range, just outside the perimeter, a perimeter they set. And that's not all. A whistleblower is saying the Secret Service and FBI held a conference call days before the rally. Dr. Jill had an event in Pittsburgh the same day as the rally. Kamala had an event in Philly same day as the rally. And the Secret Service was stretched thin because of the NATO summit in Washington. On this call, the point was made that resources were limited for the Trump rally. And the Secret Service didn't look like they did anything. And if you believe the leak that there was an Iranian threat against Trump's life last weekend, this was a massive security failure. Absolutely massive. Because they knew ahead of time that they were unprepared. Meanwhile, Director Kim Cheadle personally met with Trump at the RNC this week. And I'll be asking the president about that meeting when I interview him this weekend. And a group of Republican senators caught up with
Okay, let's get more here from Mike Benz.
Media from Revolver News points this out, that when you see it being the pipe bomb being discovered, like you said, it sat up there in full view of everyone, and somehow Secret Service missed it, everyone missed it. But when it was discovered, the cops in the immediate area, the authorities, the federal authorities in the area, I should say, that they wait for about 2 minutes. You see a bunch of school kids actually walk by. They don't scream, get back, kids. The kids just walk on by, they sit there, and then the rest of the team comes in and they get really close. They start taking pictures. I mean, I thought you're supposed to set up the perimeter, right, and send in the little robot that's going to detonate the bomb, but it was handled very bizarre. So like you said, I mean, this goes back even years now. So looking at this current situation from over the week, and I know there were snipers that were actually...
Okay, let's get more here from Mike Benz.
Radicalized online. How do we go about finding these lone wolf incel figures before the next tragedy strikes while balancing freedom on the internet? It's a tricky question. So joining us to answer some of these is former State Department official, cybersecurity expert, and founder of the Foundation for Freedom Online, Mike Benz. Mike, what a pleasure to have you on.
Likewise, great to talk today.
You, I think, you're able to more technically put into words how I think most of us feel. We're looking at this face of this alleged assassin, and it's hard to believe that he has zero digital footprint, or next to zero digital footprint. Normally, people of this type of craziness have some hint somewhere on the internet. What gives?
Well, absolutely does. I mean, this is one of these things where even just on the panel, what you just put, that he had a Discord account. The thing you talk about on Discord is what's happening on Reddit and what's happening on X and what's happening on the internet. I mean, that is what Discord effectively does. Discord is effectively a gaming server to be able to interact with other people online. That's what the whole platform exists for. We know that the FBI was at the shooter's house for about 4 hours before they disclosed the name, late in the night at about 2 a.m.
Right. So the media keeps justifying why the name wasn't released for hours and hours and hours, justifying law enforcement. Law enforcement knew the name within 30 minutes of the shooting.
And it seems to me highly likely that they were seizing all the electronics. By the way, if they were in that person's house, that means that they have that person's IP address where they were routing in from, and should theoretically be able to therefore tell us the entire internet history, all the way down to the shooter's search history if they have his IP address. Now, I'm not advocating that things of that minute a detail would be disclosed in such a case, but absolutely the social media accounts. You know, the crowd is a far better investigator than the cops. We know this because the cops, so to speak, the FBI, asked the crowd for help to identify January 6th.
All right, this is the Wall Street Journal debunking conspiracy theories.
In the immediate aftermath of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, misinformation and conspiracy theories spread rapidly online. It took authorities roughly 8 hours to publicly confirm the identity of the gunman because...
took them 8 hours to publicly confirm the identity of the gunman. But does it make the point that they knew the identity of the gunman within 30 minutes of the shooting? And Graham Wood, who's normally quite thoughtful, writes in the Atlantic similar nonsense about the conventional wisdom. And don't listen to those scary people on X, right? He's got an essay here, a case for calming down. Here is how he begins. It took several hours to identify the corpse of the man who shot Donald Trump's ear last weekend. It didn't. It took 30 minutes, right? So the guy is telling us to calm down, the case for calming down, right? And the Wall Street Journal, they're both promoting bogus narratives about the story. That, it supposedly took hours and hours and hours to finally figure out who shot Trump.
Suspects. They turned to Capitol hunters, to sedition hunters, to Unicorn Riot, to a dozen different Antifa groups to identify and do the sort of forensic investigation that federal investigators feel understaffed to do, or even to be able to follow hints and leads that the internet can dig up because of the ability to have so many different researchers pursue rabbit holes essentially in detail. But the FBI is where evidence goes to die, just as they have not disclosed a single video file of the January 6th pipe bomber since September 2021. We are coming up now on 3 years since a single video file of the guy who walked around on foot for 90 minutes through the fortress of the Capitol home turf of the national security state, Capitol Hill, for 90 minutes, talking on a cell phone. The FBI then told us that he and he alone was this pipe bomber was the only person whose cell phone data was corrupted, as opposed to the fact that they were able to geofence to target 1,500 different January 6 folks. But by the way, who was in charge of securing the DNC building that Kamala Harris arrived at the morning of January 6 ahead of time? It was the Secret Service. And what happened to the Secret Service's cell phone records when they were subpoenaed by Jim Jordan? They were all deleted. So DHS and the Secret Service, they deleted the cell phones of the Secret Service when they were the ones who were supposed to have caught the January 6th pipe bomber. They were supposed to have cased the place out. They missed a pipe bomb sitting on the park bench to the entrance of the building. They didn't even disclose the remainder of the DNC. Right now, if there are any members of Congress, any members of the Oversight Committee or Judiciary Committee listening to us, if you can subpoena the chain of custody for the missing January 6th pipe bomb DNC tape, they literally had a stationary camera of him approaching the park bench, but then they cut the camera off, the FBI did, right before he reaches into the bag to pull out the pipe bomb. So the fact that the FBI has magically stepped in and taken over a local Pennsylvania investigation and have effectively, I believe, are keeping his social media accounts effectively embargoed, and who knows if we will ever get them. God willing, we will. But this is the same FBI that is not disclosing the Biden-Hur tapes. The same Justice Department. The FBI is the intelligence arm of the Justice Department, and they told us that they weren't going to release the Hur tapes, defying a congressional subpoena because the internet might post misinformation about it. They did the same thing with the Covenant Killer shooting. And there's so much more here, but I'll pause.
For all our viewers.
Okay, Mike Benz making some interesting points. Here's a conversation with David Frum. Just going to play 2 minutes of it. I found it amusing.
But I want to turn to the start of the Republican convention. Why don't you situate the convention for our Canadian audience? Ostensibly, you've attended them in the past. What are their significance in terms of the presidential cycle? And how should we think about this year's particular Republican convention in the lead up to November's presidential election?
Well, I attended the 2016 convention in Cleveland that nominated Donald Trump the first time, and I scored one sweet room because no one of the traditional backers of the Republican Party wanted to go. There are cancellations, and so I got a call from someone I knew, like, would you like a suite in a hotel right in the center of town? And at past conventions, you're 45-minute taxi range. If you're in the press, you're in the 45-minute taxi range. I mean, you're in the next town over, the next state over. But it was a convention where the people who had traditionally backed the Republican Party wanted nothing to do with it. They thought that Donald Trump was a weirdo. They thought they didn't like his views on trade and immigration, and they also thought he was a certain loser. And they didn't see any need to write big checks for parties. So very few parties compared to other conventions. It was quite a small scale show. 8 years later, there is no doubt that there's been a total fusion of the Trump movement and the Republican Party. Whereas it used to be the Trump movement was sort of an alien presence inside the Republican Party and uneasy cohabitation with it. Now they're all in. Trump has moved toward the Republicans. There's no more suggestion.
Right. It's incredible that one man mounted a hostile takeover of the Republican Party, then eventually won the presidency. But he was only able to do it because he appealed to these instinctive right-wing impulses that had been misdirected into free trade and lower marginal tax rates, when what people really want is to feel safe and protected against a scary world.
That he's got an economic agenda for lower income people. This is an upper income person's party. It's about the corporate tax cuts and spending cuts. At the same time, the party has moved to him on trade protection. And the party has especially moved to him on a de facto amnesty for his attempt to overthrow the 2020 election. That is not to be talked of.
Okay, Mike Benz was in conversation earlier today.
Oh, it seems like there's just too many red flags from the Secret Service missing this. The fact that Kimberly Cheadle hasn't stepped down yet, I think, is an embarrassment. But what's your latest analysis here on what has happened?
I think that there needs to be some sort of congressional subcommittee that draws a through line to the January 6th pipe bomb in the present situation. And I'll tell you why I say that. We had the biggest attempted terrorist attack in our country since 9/11, we were told, on January 6, 2021. This was an event where pipe bombs, we were told, were placed at the RNC and DNC headquarters. And it took about a year after January 2021 for us to learn that Kamala Harris, the vice president under Secret Service protection as the vice president-elect that day, was actually at the DNC building the day as the pipe bomb was found, which meant Secret Service had to have cased the area, had to have sent an advance team, had to have had bomb-sniffing dogs, had to have done an entire world-class protection of that site. And the pipe bomb was placed at the front leg of the park bench at the entrance of the building. And then Kamala Harris either lied or stonewalled Congress and evidently the Justice Department, because the Justice Department lied in their indictments for the first full year of the prosecution, saying that Kamala Harris was in the Capitol building. But it turned out it was the Secret Service who was supposed to have protected against that pipe bomb. And then we learned that pipe bomb was laid out for 17 hours. And then once the world got wise to the Secret Service's role there, and they were sent letters by House investigators, they wiped their phones so that we couldn't find out what their communications about it were. Meanwhile, the FBI went and seized all the tapes. The FBI, as we speak, is sitting on a tape of the January 6th pipe bomber taking the bomb out of the bag. In March 2021, they disclosed a video of the pipe bomber approaching the park bench, but then they cut the stationary camera off. We are told that that pipe bomber plants the bomb at that bench. Why would they hide the missing money shot of the commission of the crime? If that bomb was planted there 17 hours earlier and then discovered by the Secret Service, we will come back to your remarks in 2 minutes after we send someone up there. But for some reason, Secret Service didn't do that. We need those communications freezed and seized by House Investigator Clinton bleach bidding her phones after they were under subpoena. But so once again, you have Secret Service malfeasance. This reason she cited that a minor, less than 10-degree slope, something that a baby could circumnavigate on all fours. And yet that was the reason that the nearest elevated surface to the entire platform was left undefended. Not only that, they evidently had the person in their sights for 26 minutes, and they didn't even tell Trump to get off the stage.
We have law enforcement reporting suspicious behavior by crooks 3 hours before the shooting. So they had hours and hours of notice that you had a suspicious character with a rangefinder, right? They were notified that someone with a rangefinder tried to get into the Trump rally, all right? A rangefinder is what you use to shoot someone at a distance, right? They knew this 3 hours in advance.
I can understand if perhaps you don't want to, shoot somebody if you think it might not be a gun. But the moment you see somebody up on that elevated surface, you tell the president.
And also the counter snipers, they have scopes, all right? They're able to see with great particularity, and they are staring at crooks, right? The idea that they couldn't see that he had a gun before he started shooting Donald Trump, I am highly skeptical of that. All right, let's get more from Jesse.
And the DOJ. This smells like a cover-up. Congressman Mike Waltz and Steve Scalise join me now. Scalise, you guys have the power of the purse. If Cheadle doesn't resign, you can defund her salary. Are you going to do that?
Well, there's a lot more that we're looking into as well. Starting Monday, we're having hearings. The Oversight Committee, Chairman Comer, is going to be having a hearing with the Secret Service. Whether she shows up or not, we're having that hearing to demand answers. There's other committees like Homeland Security, Chairman Green's digging into these same things. She is now one of the new faces, unfortunately not the only one, of the failures of the Biden Biden administration. There are too many. The incompetence. She's so concerned about DEI and woke causes that she has failed in her primary mission, and that is to protect the president and former presidents of the United States. She needs to go. Whether she'll resign or not, she works for us, the taxpayers, at the request of the president of the United States. He ought to demand her resignation and fire her on the spot.
Well, they're going to fire Joe Biden. He might actually go out before Cheadle. We'll find out. But you should strip her salary away, make her dip into her savings to go grocery shopping. It's totally unacceptable what she's done.
Completely.
So if you guys hold hearings, because there must be some sort of select committee on the attempted assassination of President Trump, you should hold it somewhere else besides Washington, D.C., because if some of these people you get up there lie, there's not going to be anybody in D.C. that's going to say, oh, yeah, well...
Okay, we'll keep an eye on Fox News to see if we get any real news. Here's more commentary from Mike Benz.
President, hey, step down. We need to investigate this. Come back to your remarks in 2 minutes after we send someone up there. But for some reason, Secret Service didn't do that. We need those communications freezed and seized by House investigators immediately, so they can't do the January 6th pipe bomb situation again. And the fact that the FBI has not disclosed any social media accounts, any online presence, any communications, we need to know this shooter's network. Not more transparency from BlackRock than from the FBI. They were at that shooter's house for 4 hours before they disclosed a name. That means they have that person's internet router. That means they have their IP address. That means they have every Google search this would-be assassin and Trump rally murder has ever done from his home computer. That means they have the whole network and all communications, and they need to be turned over to congressional investigators immediately.
Mike, it's a brilliant analysis once again. And
a fednapping event happened where you had radicalized loners, the lead person living in the back of a vacuum machine repair shop, whose life was turned into a Truman Show, as that person was surrounded by something like 12 to 13 different federal agents and informants, radicalizing that person and pitching them logistics for how to...
Right. Wasn't this right before the 2018 midterms worked against Republicans?
Kidnap and potentially assassinate the governor of Michigan. It took months after that to learn of the role of federal informants and years to learn that the entire plot was concocted by the FBI. Now, what's very instructive about that is the entire explosives angle was the FBI top to bottom. It was the FBI who proposed the use of explosives. It was the FBI who sent multiple federal agents to the training sites of the 3%ers, the militia there, and then instructed them how to make pipe bombs, how to make explosive devices, and then tried to sell them pipe bomb making material. So the fact that you have an FBI, by the way, they did the same thing in a case in 2017 with another so-called right-wing militia person, where once again, they pitched the person on how to buy explosives. They trained the person on how to buy explosives, and then only...
This is wild.
I mean, Tucker just evinces happiness.
I've been...
Everyone who spends time with him likes him.
Thank you.
To know Tucker is to like him.
I feel like I know about half the people in the room. This is wild. What are you doing? Justin Wells. Thank you, guys.
He's been married to the same woman for 33 years and still enjoys having sex with her.
Peter Navarro is back. Welcome to Peter Navarro. Suffering the fate that has happened to so many who are friends with Donald Trump. Thank you for having me. I have been to many conventions. I have never been to a more fun convention or a convention with better vibes. They literally let Navarro out of prison. First of all, thank you. This feels a lot different from what I thought it was going to feel like. I can't hear you, but I know it's something good. So I watched the video of what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania about 50 times. I think I was one of about 8 billion people around the world who watched it. And the more I watched it, the more it struck me that everything was different after that moment. Everything. And this convention is different. The nation is different. The world is different. Donald Trump is different. When he stood up after being shot in the face, bloodied, and put his hand up, I thought at that moment, that was a transformation. This was no longer a man. Well, I think it was divine intervention, but the effect that it had on Donald Trump, he was no longer just a political party's nominee.
or a former president or a future president. This was the leader of a nation. And I think there's a difference. I've spent most of my life in Washington, where the president is at the top of the pyramid. Everyone wants to be the president. But if you think about it, the presidency comes with great power, obviously. But if you think about it, that is a title that is bestowed by a process of some sort that can be subverted. And in the end, it does not confer by itself, as no title does, legitimacy. Just because you call yourself the president doesn't mean that much inherently. I can call my dog the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. It doesn't mean she is. No, it's true. And you hate to say it, but it is also true, as a fact, that you could take, I don't know, a mannequin, a dead person, and make him president. No, you could. You could. I'm just saying theoretically possible. With enough cheating, that could happen. But being a leader is very different. It's not a title. It's organic. You can't name someone a leader. A leader is the bravest man. That's who the leader is. That is true in all human organizations. This is a law of nature. And in that moment, Donald Trump, months before the presidential election, became the leader of this nation. That was the most obvious to me. And I have to say, I think it changed him. He reached out to Trump within hours of it that night. And what he said to me that night, having just been shot in the face, he said not a single word about himself. He said only how amazed he was and how proud he was of the crowd, which didn't run. And I thought two things. The first thing I thought was, well, of course they didn't run. His courage gave them heart. A leader's courage gives courage to his people. And the second thing I thought was, this is the selfish guy I've been hearing about for 9 years, really? Not a word about himself? About his people, period. And the second thing I noticed, which I don't think anyone has remarked upon in public, but I'm just going to since I don't have a script, like why not, is that he turned down the most obvious opportunity in politics to inflame the nation after being shot. To inflame the nation, which is an opportunity that almost every other politician I've ever met, and certainly his opponents, would have taken instantly. And they would have said, well, what is this? How did he get shot? Like, how did this happen? And those are real questions that we have to get to the bottom of. But in the moments, the days, the week after the shooting, he did not say that. He did his best to bring the country together, and I thought, this is the divisive figure, this is the irresponsible person. No. This is the most responsible, unifying behavior of a leader I think I've ever seen. So the question is, where is he leading us? And I could go on for hours, but let me just sum it up. I do think the entire point from the famous escalator ride 9 years ago until today of Donald Trump's public life has been to remind us of one fact, which is a leader's duty is to his people, to his country, and to no other. That's the point. That's the only point. And another word for this is democracy. Democracy, in case you're a little sick of being beaten in the face with democracy on television, actual democracy is the proposition that the citizens of a country own that country. They're not renters, they're not serfs, they're not slaves, they are the owners of the country. And for that to be true, their leaders have to represent them, which is another way of saying they have to do what the people want them to do, or a close approximation thereof. But if they completely ignore what people want, not just 1 year, but generationally, say for 50 years, then it may be, I don't know what, it's not a democracy. And so I think the entire Trump project, paradoxically, is attacked as an enemy of democracy, is to return democracy to the United States. Hey, pay attention to what people actually want. And the lack of interest in that question in Washington is something that ultimately drove me out of the city after 35 years. Lawmakers stepping over the prostrate bodies of their fellow citizens ODing on drugs to go cast votes to send money to some foreign country. Actually, we've lost more Americans from drugs in the past 4 years than we lost in World War II. Yeah, our bloodiest war. More than we lost in World War II. Does anybody care? It is pathetic. It is pathetic. And do you hear a single word from Washington about doing anything about it? We know where the drugs are coming from. We know the supply routes. The U.S. military spent billions bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You don't see our commander-in-chief suggesting that we use our military to protect our country or the lives of its citizens. No. That's for Ukraine. And it's too much, actually. It's too insulting. It's too insulting. It's a middle finger in the face of every American. It's a very clear statement, which is unmistakable. And that is, we don't care about you. And Donald Trump, whatever you say about him, and I think he's a wonderful person. I know him well. By the way, the funniest person I've ever met in my life, actually. You can't be funny without perspective or without empathy, which is true. But everything else about Trump aside, he actually cares because he's interested in the people who live here because that's his job. A father's job, his duty is to his family. An officer's duty is to his men. A president's duty is to his citizens. And he seems to be the only one who thinks that. And in his choice for vice president, J.D. Vance, he's made that really clear. J.D. Vance, I'll say this about him, is a thoroughly decent man, and I'll just admit it, a friend of mine, one of the very few politicians in Washington who actually is very close to his own wife, which is wonderful to see. And she's wonderful, actually. But J.D. Vance has views that are closer to Trump's voters than anyone else in Washington in office. Therefore, he's the vice president. That's called democracy. So I will stop on just one point, and that is what's happened over the past month since the debate, and particularly on Saturday in Butler. I think a lot of people are wondering, what is this? This doesn't look like politics. Something bigger is going on here. I think even people who don't believe in God are beginning to think, well, maybe there's something to this, actually. And I'm starting to think it's going to be okay, actually. I do think that. In the day after the midterm elections in 2018, Antifa came to my house. The Democratic Party's militia, okay? I was at work. It was obvious when I was at work because it was public. My wife was home alone. They tried to come in through the front door. They terrorized her. She hid in our pantry. It was on television. It was horrible, actually. It was, I mean, I'm not whining about it. It wasn't getting shot in the face, but it wrecked our day. And the next morning, we're lying in bed, and the phone rings for my wife, and it's Donald Trump, who's not like a regular text buddy of Donald Trump's. She picks it up, hello? Susie, it's Donald Trump. And it's coming through, I could hear it. You know, I'm lying in bed, whoa. And the first thing he says is, I'm gonna stand guard outside your house. And she goes, oh, it's so nice. And he says, I'll never forget this as long as I live. He says, you know, there's a lot of hate out there. And she said, you know, there is, Mr. President. And then he says, but there's a lot of love. There's a lot of love. And we are seeing that love. I don't think it's human love. And I'll just stop this. I'm not always convinced that I'm on the right side. I've been on the wrong side many times. You'll never hear me say I'm on God's side or God's with me or even I'm with God. I want to be, not sure I am. But I will say this unequivocally and conclusively. God is among us right now. And I think that's enough. God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr.
That was Tucker Carlson. You may remember him from the 8 o'clock hour here, talking about how the assassination attempt completely transformed Donald Trump into a national leader and the bravery he showed with the fists in the air.
So Tucker went to the Fox booth, and apparently he was greeted cordially by the head of Fox News and by many of his friends at Fox News. But Tucker Carlson, love him or hate him, and I passionately disagree with much of what he says, but he's incredibly likable. He's a terrific public speaker. I can see him being a vice president for J.D. Vance in 4 years, and then serving J.D. Vance possibly for 8 years, and then you might well have Tucker Carlson run for president. Okay, a little bit more analysis here from Mike Benz.
Levied the indictment after the person pressed the remote on the button they gave them to blow it up. The FBI has a special expertise in teaching loaners and selling loaners and training loaners on how to make pipe bombs. And the fact that this person may have had this explosive devices we're learning, and the fact that they are sitting on the January 6th pipe bomber, who you damn well know that they have leads on. This person walked barefoot through Capitol Hill for 90 minutes on foot, making cell phone calls. And then the FBI tells us, oh, the data was corrupted. BS. They didn't find a single hair follicle, a single skin cell when they have this person walking around on foot, touching surfaces the whole time. No.
One ridiculous thing about the FBI is they don't tape record their interviews. So you talk to the FBI, they can write anything down. I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, brilliant. And just on the page, until you assess the trend.
The shooter on the way to the shooting and let the shooting go off. He was trailing him in a car behind that. What if it's the same situation here? Can we afford to wait 4.5 years to learn that information? We need a congressional subcommittee to subpoena all of this, and everyone who does not cooperate with that subpoena should be taking over from the jail cell that Stephen Bannon will be getting out of in 3 months.
Yeah, and the one that Peter Navarro just got out of.
Okay, so Ben Shapiro is somewhat ambivalent about J.D. Vance because Ben Shapiro is ambivalent about nationalism. You'll find among scholars of populism, for example, that Jewish scholars of populism overwhelmingly react in a very negative way to populism because Jews have not tended to be popular. Jews have survived down through the ages by making deals with the elite, with the monarchy, and many Jewish elites have thought that Jews are safer in a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, divided society where elites are able to make deals with various segments of society to maintain control, as opposed to the rise of populism where the people unite. Now we've got J.D. Vance, a populist, joining Donald Trump, a populist, and they'll probably get about a third of the Jewish vote because they're definitely the most pro-Israel party. So Jews do instinctively tend to have a great suspicion of populism, and many Jewish intellectuals like Ben Shapiro tend to be highly skeptical of nationalism, right? Nationalism, Gentile nationalisms tend to make Jews nervous, all right? Jews who aren't right-wing. But those Jews who are the most nationalistic, right, who are the most Zionist, they also are the most likely to vote Republican. So many Jewish intellectuals like Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager, they love the idea that America is an idea because that makes them feel more comfortable when the truth is America is a particular people, a nation that was overwhelmingly founded by Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And most of the key people in the development of the United States were Anglo-Saxon.
And it was also made by the World War II veteran who spoke yesterday, that America is not just an idea, it's a homeland, which of course is absolutely true. Here is Senator Vance last night.
America is not just an idea. It is a group of people with a shared history and a common future. It is, in short, a nation. Now, it is part of that tradition, of course, that we welcome newcomers. But when we allow newcomers into our American family, we allow them on our terms. People will not fight for abstractions, but they will fight for their home. And if this movement of ours is going to succeed, and if this country is going to thrive, our leaders have to remember that America is a nation and its citizens deserve leaders who put its interests first.
Okay, now, again, I agree with everything he's saying. I'm just not sure what he's arguing against. Because, obviously...
He's arguing against people like you who think that America is primarily a set of ideas.
America is a nation. France is also a nation. Poland is also a nation. Right? When he says that America is a land, yes, so is literally every other land. That's true. And America happens to be...
No, he's saying the United States of America is a particular land for particular people. It's not just some intellectual abstraction.
The best land, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. It's the best land and it's the best nation. But why? Why? And the answer is the idea that's connected to those things. So he says that...
No, that's not what makes America great. The great ideas come out of the great people, right? The great founding stock that people came to what is now the United States, overwhelmingly from England, and they brought with them their own natural abilities, and they brought with them English ideas about politics and jurisprudence, and these great ideas emerge for particular people, right? These same ideas wouldn't work as well for different stock.
That America is not just an idea, and of course that's true. I think the thing that he's arguing against, and here I agree with him, I think the thing he's arguing against is this sort of abstracted idea that Joe Biden uses all the time, where he says it's not who we are. And what he means by that is it's not who the left is.
Right, so Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager are quite skeptical of nationalism. From their perspective, there's good nationalism and bad nationalism. But all nationalism contains good sides and bad sides, all right? Nationalism means you have increased group identity. That comes with many advantages, all right? You have more social cohesion, you have more social trust, you have more pride, you have more willingness to sacrifice on behalf of your nation. But there's always going to be a downside. It also comes with more negative views of outgroups and more pressure to conform.
Okay, the attempt to universalize American values in the sense that they can either be exported to Iraq or imported from Guatemala. That's silly and it's wrong. And I think that's what he is saying right there. But when he says that people don't fight for ideas, obviously that's not true. That's certainly not true. I mean, I'm sorry, the Cold War was a war of ideas. It turns out it was not just a war of territories. Otherwise, it would be like most European wars, which are wars of territory. Turns out that people fight for ideas all the time. The idea is connected.
World War II was not primarily a fight for ideas, right? It was a fight for control and power and to preserve your own nation in peril by an invading nation.
Connected to the home. That's what makes America a nation. And I think that's what he's trying to say. I hope that's what he's trying to say. Because otherwise, I'm not sure what the exact kind of...
Okay, so Ben Shapiro is lost. So it's painful to play that. All right, let's get a little bit more here from Claremont Institute, the American Thinker podcast.
Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
He looks like he doesn't have a man who has nothing left to prove to himself. You know, when he walks into that RNC room, just with this, I don't know, I'm the last person who would expect myself to be talking this way, but with this kind of serenity about him. I mean, like, I was kidding sort of about God endorsing Donald Trump with this moment. But if you believe, as I do, that God intervenes in history and not just sculpts the world, but also personally takes a hand in it, it's almost impossible. Whatever intentions you want to attribute to God, or whether you want to leave that.
Think about all the evolutionary advantages to believing that God intervenes in history. All right, think how people who believe that will feel less lonely, less discouraged, more optimistic, more willing to build for the future, right? They will feel stronger. They will be more likely to connect with their in-group. So many advantages to believing that. Even if you're an atheist, right? You can admire people believing something that's going to help them make life a little less lonely.
Unknown. It is impossible to look at that video and not just think, there's like, you're watching divine intervention in real time. Week of the Republican National Convention, which means there have been a whole bunch of high-profile endorsements rolling in for Donald Trump, the presumptive nominee. We've had former primary opponents like Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. We've heard from some unlikely celebrities, such as the former stripper and video vixen Amber Rose. They're just the same, but quite different in tone and mood, especially as Trump himself fought his way back to the podium to raise up his fist, capturing what must be, if not the most iconic image of my lifetime politically in America, certainly in the top 5, raising his fist, yelling, "Fight, fight, fight," as the American flag waved behind him and blood streamed down his ear. Huge host of questions yet unanswered in the wake of this momentous and really awful event. Not that much known about Crooks just yet, although he has been taken out after a series of blunders, severe blunders by the Secret Service, and many fingers pointed at Director Kimberly Cheadle, Biden appointee, who has yet to step down. She's claimed that the problem with covering the roof where Crooks was positioned was that there was a slope that might have made it unsafe for the agents to be there. So certainly a reckoning to come on the failures of the Secret Service, or at least we would assume. and a tense atmosphere in the air as people wonder whether we might be in for retaliations or political violence. On the other hand, there's been, I would say, a definite transformation in the vibe after this event, and certainly in reaction to Trump's own response. He's appeared at the RNC with a bandage on his ear, looking for all the world as if he has sort of touched death and returned in enlightenment. You get the impression of like Dostoevsky after his sentence was commuted, writing to his brother about how the joy of life has transformed all things for him. There's clearly been some really tight messaging control around this RNC to lean into the idea that, in fact, Trump is now the unity candidate, that we should rally around him. And others, I think, seem to feel a certain degree of permission to do so now that they hadn't before. Altogether, if you have to go through a horrifying event like this one, it seems like we narrowly missed a lot of much worse possibilities. But what do you guys think? Big deal. What are your reactions?
Well, I mean, tremendous relief. I mean, that was the most. I mean, people talk about like that we're now in like the two timelines that diverged at that moment, and it's just so horrifying to think of what would have happened had it gone the other way. I mean, one, yes, okay, we would have felt that he was a martyr, but I mean, walking around New York City and listening to all of the politicians, like, you know, making their noises about how, oh, this was terrible, but I mean, knowing how gleeful they would have been and how ecstatically happy they would have been. I mean, this was like the shadow, like their repressed shadow emerging. This like Crooks fellow, this like twisted, lonely deviant. Like he makes like Lee Harvey Oswald seem like.
Okay, so we just heard from Representative Mike Waltz out of Florida. Trump shooter Thomas Crooks had 3 encrypted overseas accounts. And Megyn Kelly's got a great tweet. Is this the first presidential election in which, before the election, one party has so clearly defeated the other candidate to the point where said opponent is forced to drop out? And more and more Democrats are saying it's time for Joe Biden to drop out.
There's a congressman from California, Democrat, named Jim Costa, no relation. He just called CBS News, watching our coverage, and said he has decided just now to announce that he can no longer support President Biden remaining in the race. He said it's time for President Biden, his friend. He's a moderate Democrat, one of those blue dogs in the House. He said it's time for President Biden to leave the race. He made the decision in the last hour, and he said other Democrats are moving in that direction. So this is such a fluid moment. Yep. You have the Republican National Convention unfolding, and Democratic House members are watching CBS and saying, enough's enough.
And doing this on.
And the longer Joe Biden takes to drop out, all right, the more painful it's going to become for him. Amazing scenes from Leeds in the United Kingdom, right? Muslim riots, the police running in the face of Islamic riots. The local politician is hardcore Muslim. Britain's been absolutely transformed by an enormous amount of Islamic immigration.
Like a fun guy to invite to a party. He's just so awful. And the thought that he really embodied the desires of the Democrats. I mean, they would have been so excited if Trump was dead. They would have loved it. There would have been no stopping them. And I don't care how much they would deplore violence. They would have just been so delighted. And then who knows? Maybe who knows what we would have done on our side, but maybe they would have won and felt that they were vindicated. It's just so terrible. I don't know why I keep thinking about that. The fact that he providentially turned his head at that instant, like, thank God. Regarding the Secret Service, I mean, the questions keep piling up, and more it is seeming like, I don't know what was going on, but my initial thought about it was like, they probably didn't like hire this guy to shoot Trump, but it wouldn't surprise me if Mayorkas and this woman in charge of the Secret Service just kind of between themselves were like, okay, well, let's just we have to give Trump a security detail, but let's go through and figure out like who just got back from maternity leave, who has a drinking problem, who are the ones who are on the way out. I mean, that certainly would be within their power. Like, just give them the C team. And now it's emerged, a lot of them were substitutes and maybe not used to it. Heads have got a role in the Secret Service, but I don't know. I'm just very thankful. Yes, and I agree, Trump does seem like somewhat, there's something kind of like, there's like a transfiguration, like a weird kind of mellowness. But, and I'm sorry to keep going on, but the image, the idea that his initial response after being shot in the head was to jump up and roar like a lion.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, that's like he's like now a world historical figure. Like, he exists, as far as I'm concerned, like with one foot in time and one foot in eternity. I mean, I know that sounds like totally bonkers and the sort of thing that the Democrats always accuse us of doing, but I really feel like he is now like, he's like, entered, he's split time.
He's secured his position on the pages of history books across the world. I mean, there are kids in like Uganda acting out his reaction.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite the, there's a piano getting tuned in the background. I'm broadcasting from an undisclosed but secure location in Cape Cod.
Okay, let's have a look at some tweets here by Mike Benz. He's got a good point here. Donald Trump Jr. said that the left wants to put you in prison for making a meme. PolitiFact rules this is mostly false. In March, a federal jury convicted Douglas Mackey, a social media influencer from West Palm Beach, Florida, for participating in a conspiracy to deprive people of their constitutional right to vote. How did he do this? He posted some memes online. Right, the conviction was linked to memes he shared online before the 2016 presidential election that encouraged Hillary Clinton supporters to vote by text message or social media, which, shockingly, are not legal ways to cast a vote. Right, mostly false, except for when you're actually jailed for memes like the Douglas Mackey case or January 6 defendants whose present sentences were enhanced because of Trump memes on their phones. Right, important PSA for civilians. Prosecutors now routinely prove criminal intent to the judge and jury, right, based on memes on your phone. And particularly if you're traveling overseas, right, you may not be able to get into a particular country, right, if they don't like the memes on your phone.
Traveling, I'm in London now, so
this is Christopher
I'm not
Caldwell.
in a position to have really informed opinions about what's going on in Milwaukee. Yeah. But certainly from what I know of J.D. Vance and what I've seen of him, it's a decision with a lot of logic behind it. So to that extent, it's not a surprising decision at all. Mm. However, it does break from a kind of a Republican tradition of using the vice presidential nomination to shore up what the president lacks. Mm. And so it seems to make, the Republicans have assumed that if they can name a person from a different region or a different political tendency than the president, that they're going to harvest the votes from both of those tendencies. Mm. I think what they've done in practice is present the public with a ticket that is kind of incoherent. And I think the kind of the original sin of this type of vice presidential nominee was Reagan nominating George H.W. Bush after he defeated him in 1980. And most Republican tickets have resembled that.
Because a lot of people around Trump, or people involved in the campaign, donors and so on, we understand, were pushing for more of a sort of conventional election strategy pick. Right. Like a Nikki Haley, like a Marco Rubio, yes, like a Glenn Youngkin, and so on.
Right. The money was really behind Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
So Christopher Caldwell is my favorite political commentator and essayist, along with Steve Saylor, Mark Halperin, my favorite political reporter.
So it's sort of like, you, Mr. Trump, have won over the populist part of America, but we represent the moneyed part of America. So please give us a vice presidential nominee who represents, everything that your voters hate.
And so in a way, it was an expression of great confidence from the Trump campaign.
It was that's where the break is.
Wow, Russell Brand is at the Republican National Convention. I mean, Republicans look like they're just having a ball. All right. Conservatives have become the fun party under Donald Trump.
This is the next, J.D. Vance is the next generation of Trumpies. Mm. And it was hard to see that for a while because he's culturally somewhat different from Donald Trump.
But there could well be some strategic thinking from Donald Trump, and strategic thinking specifically about November, because J.D. Vance is the senator for Ohio. The Republicans probably would have won Ohio anyway, but more broadly, he would appeal to those swing states in the Rust Belt, so Wisconsin, Michigan, perhaps Pennsylvania, because he is a white working class boy from a very poor background. And he has this sort of beautiful story to tell about himself, which is that he managed to get into Harvard and then Yale Law School, and then served in the Marines, and then went into business, financial technology, made a success of himself there. It's a great American story.
Yes, he's a really special person. And I've met him only by doing a profile of him during his 2022 Senate campaign, and he came to into public prominence as the author of this memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, which is, it was a big seller even in England. I think it's a kind of a special thing to be a hillbilly. To be a hillbilly in Ohio it's really actually a kind of a class thing in the way that you understand it in England. In the United States, when people talk about class, they're usually talking about how much money you make. Being a hillbilly in Ohio is, Vance's grandfather came from the hollows of Kentucky and came into Middletown, Ohio, and found work in a steel rolling plant. They made sheet steel. It was a factory called Armco. It's still there, but it doesn't employ many people. And it at its height, it employed tens of thousands of people and turned that into a middle class area. And at that point, those hillbillies, some of them did pretty well. There are people in Vance's family who have done well, who've become fairly well off. And the family itself is quite it's full of smart people. His family are sort of accomplished and impressive in their way, but they are hillbillies. They're from the middle of the country, from a city that is now just a real disaster area economically, that has very few businesses, and so they're kind of looked down on. That's why I say it sort of resembles something like the English class system, which we didn't really have that before. But Vance has a fantastic ear for that. And you're right. Ohio is no longer a swing state. Between 1964 and let's say 2016, Ohio voted for the winner in the presidential race every time.
Yes.
It was the ultimate swing state. In 2020, it lurched very decisively to Trump, and now it's a Republican state. But you're right, Vance has got a feeling for this class of people that will help Trump in many other states.
Okay, here's a classmate of Crooks. And first of all, Representative Jim Jordan says whistleblowers reveal Secret Service was understaffed at Trump rally because the agency was covering the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. Here's a classmate of Crooks.
Not like politicians, especially with the choices that we've had. He did not like our politicians. It was especially during 2016. It was Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, all of them. He showed that he disliked all of them, did not like any of them. So I brought up the fact that I'm Hispanic and I'm for Trump, and he said, "Well, you're Hispanic, so shouldn't you hate Trump?" And I was like, "No, he's great. I mean, like he's a."
All right, let's get a little bit more here from.
Well, he's also
Caldwell.
a convert to Catholicism, and that's another interesting aspect to him because this national conservative populism movement, whatever you want to call it, does seem to appeal, particularly among the intellectuals of that movement, to Catholics. Why do you think that might be?
No, it doesn't appeal to Catholics, but a lot of the intellectuals are Catholic.
Over very concrete things, like his willingness to appoint conservative justices to the Supreme Court who have overturned Roe v. Wade. That's something that is probably a plus among Catholic voters. On the other hand, he has a kind of a crude, not very, sometimes impolite way of addressing the public, which is less popular among them. I'm not sure that Vance's route into Trumpian populism is through his Catholicism, interesting though the Catholicism may be.
Well, do you think it might be through the Teamsters and the unions? Because I was reading last night that he's built quite effective relationships with the Teamsters in Ohio. And Biden, a big part of Biden's appeal, actually, has been his friendliness with the Teamsters, with the unions in those areas. And perhaps Vance could tackle that.
Yes. There's always been, American trade unionism has always been very linked to the Democratic Party. That began to shift during the Vietnam War, when trade unions were among the most stalwart Americans backing the war. Richard Nixon took advantage of this and grew close to the Teamsters. The Teamsters also were, among other unions, manufacturing unions, police unions tended to back Republicans from that point on. Reagan had good relationships with unions, but unions have been kind of fading, all right? Democrats have tried to build up the public service unions, particularly the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Democratic unions are generally in the government or in kind of government-adjacent things, school administrators and that sort of deal. Vance has got this connection to the people who feel left behind by outsourcing. That is, the people who still build things, you know? And that's, when you look at Ohio, when you look at his state, and you look at how gaga they've gone for Trump, Ohio is a little different than other places. When I talk to people all over the country who like Trump, you know, they basically look at Trump in the same way that Trump's opponents look at Trump. You know, yeah, he's got a lot of energy. You know, I wouldn't want my daughter to marry a guy like that or something like that. But, you know, the difference between whether you like Trump or not is not your judgment of his character. It's your judgment of, you know, of whether you think the United States is corrupt or not. That is the decisive issue. Trump is a referendum on that issue. If you think the United States is corrupt, you will vote for Donald Trump. If you don't,
yeah, that's a key point. If you think the United States is corrupt, you will vote for Donald Trump.
You won't. But
so I remember when Donald Trump went down the escalator, I wasn't watching, but a friend of mine at the time was listening to it on the radio, and he came in and he said, "Wow, this is an amazing speech. You would have loved it," because he knew my political leanings, that we have to cut down on immigration. He said, "Trump's saying all the things that you're always saying." And I just laughed it off. I've never had any interest in Donald Trump, neither pro or con. I just didn't care about Donald Trump. But then a lot of the dissident right that I was reading started making points that Donald Trump's rise presages support for controlling our immigration, getting control of our borders. It'd be something that'd be good for the American nation. And so I tried to ignore Donald Trump during the first couple of weeks of his candidacy, and then I saw more and more comments on Steve Saylor's blog and on Twitter making the case to take Donald Trump seriously. And then about 6 weeks, 2 months into his candidacy, right? And by this time, Steve Saylor had already started taking Trump seriously. Talking the summer of 2015, Steve Saylor took Trump seriously when he was willing to endure economic losses of having various corporations stop selling his goods, and widespread condemnation among elites for things that he said about immigrants, and that Trump stood by his comments, didn't give up, and that's when Steve Saylor started taking him seriously. So I started taking him seriously after about a month to 6 weeks into his candidacy, and then I think in August of 2015, for the first time, I watched a Trump rally, and I noticed that I got the chills. Right, when it began with his plane circling the rally and then coming into land, and then you see the vehicles driving Trump to the rally, and then he gets up and speaks about the power and importance of genes. He's a great believer in good genes, and I thought, wow. And I also got a shiver, right? So intellectually, I started to take Trump seriously. And then I felt an emotional connection. He did create a spectacle. And the Financial Times had a great article today on why people support Donald Trump. And a good part of it is that they feel amazing, right? Donald Trump helps you to feel amazing. He has an ability to create spectacles. He can speak off the cuff for 2 hours and hold the crowd mesmerized. There's also the religious component. He effectively legislates and stands up for Christians. There's the economic component, that he did a good job with the economy, particularly for low-skilled workers. But it's powerful when you get both the cognitive arguments and you start taking Trump seriously, and then you can combine cognitive argumentation, cognitive perspectives with visceral reactions, right? When you can marry your emotions and your visceral responses to your ideology and to your politics and to the most pressing issues of the day. And so this is what Donald Trump does so powerfully. He brings all those things in for people who think that America's become corrupt.
The difference with Ohio is these people, that it is the state that was probably most wiped out during deindustrialization. There are car plants there. There are a couple of them that I visited, or the areas where I visited in my last article, that made 20 million automobiles apiece. And the people there consider Ohio rightly as one of the great high points of Western industrial civilization. And now it's all gone. Mm-hmm. Those are Vance's those are Vance's people. All those people who are historically, American labor voters.
So Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro have clearly indicated they're not interested in running as Kamala Harris's vice president.
Voters, American industrial labor voters, are totally behind him.
You mentioned Nixon there. Vance is the youngest vice presidential nominee since Nixon, I think. And thinking about Nixon always makes me think about Trump, because Nixon had the most extraordinary Lazarus-like comeback in his career. If we think Donald Trump now looks increasingly likely to be the next president of the United States, this is one of the most extraordinary political comebacks, given January the 7th, 2021, and the mood about Donald Trump then.
Yes, I think it is. It just seems to be, there was such a multi-front press by American elites against Trump, and they have managed to convict him on one of the cases they had against him. But that to his voters, apparently, that only serves as further confirmation of the country's corruption. So we do have a kind of tribal politics, and it's worth bearing in mind that we are writing, we are talking on the, just in the immediate aftermath of Trump's shooting. So, which I think is going to lead to a lot of sympathy for him, is going to make it sort of more difficult for the Democrats to have their argument about whether to replace Joe Biden. So Trump does look stronger in these days than he has, in the past few weeks. I think whether he makes it in the election or not, you're right. This is an amazing political comeback. It's a political comeback, not after years in the wilderness like Nixon spent in the 60s, but maybe it's more like the political comeback that the Brexiters executed, in 2019 and 2020, after it looked like Brexit had been derailed, in the 3 years since the referendum.
Do you think since the shooting on Saturday, quite a few people have come out on?
Okay, so what is Steve Saylor's history with Donald Trump? So November 28, 2000, Steve Saylor laid out the Republican path to presidential victory used by Donald Trump in 2016, and what has become known as the Saylor strategy, meaning that Republicans should go hunt for votes where the votes are, primarily among white Americans. So Donald Trump declared his campaign for president on June 16, 2015. On that day, Steve Saylor's blog posts were mocking Jeb Bush, and Saylor does not mention Donald Trump in a blog headline until 3 weeks after Trump had begun his campaign. July 9, Donald Trump is getting under the skin of Catalina Bush. Next headline came a day later. Claude Monet is the new Donald Trump. Further headlines came slowly on Steve Saylor's blog, July 15. One Clinton denounces Trump. Another Clinton mum about his continued membership at Trump National Golf Club. July 27, what Donald Trump is up to. July 31, Bernie Sanders ruining isolate Trump strategy. August 4, the debate on immigration we need, Donald Trump versus Carlos Slim. August 5, Bill Clinton encouraged his golf buddy Donald Trump in May. August 6, question, what is Trump's appeal? It is. August 12, Steve Saylor in Takis magazine votes his first essay to Trump, Obama, Trump, and Daffy Duck. August 18, Scott Dilbert Adams on Trump's sales techniques. August 19, Saylor in Takis magazine on Trump's immigration position paper. First Steve Saylor commenter to mention Donald Trump after he announced his run for president was a bloke named Jefferson, who wrote June 17, and of course, Donald Trump is never boring. Next comment was June 20th of 2015. Poster, Saylor has an interesting life, wrote, any comment on the Donald? Far be it for me to comment on the stupid party, meaning Republicans, but selecting a rich blowhard during a recession doesn't sound like a winning strategy. Major Kong responds, Bush, Clinton, Perot, Bush, Clinton, Trump. Next person to comment appears to be the first Steve Saylor commentator to take Donald Trump seriously as a candidate for president. So Nathan Wartooth wrote June 20th, 2015 on Saylor's site. I liked Trump's speech. He's talking about how the middle class gets raped by trade deals and that he wants to enforce immigration law. If I vote in the Republican Party, I'll probably vote for him. He looks like a god compared to the other candidates. Republicans can't manage to get anyone to run that is even half decent. At least the far left is Bernie Sanders to represent them. We don't have anyone. After this, the Donald becomes a prime focus of Steve Saylor's commenters and of my own blogging. So I start going all in on Trump June 20th. So he announced his campaign June 16th. So 4 days later, I start taking Donald Trump seriously. So 4 days after Donald Trump launched, he became a prime focus of my blogging. On election night, Steve Saylor wrote that back in 2016, Trump was heroic for entering the race to become president. Steve Saylor replies to me, by the 4th of July 2015, I was noticing that Trump was putting his businesses on the line over the immigration issue, not backing down when the Golf Tour, NBC, Univision, and Macy's were boycotting him. Everybody else in America collapses under that kind of pressure. Also, there was the Kate Steinle murder of early July 2015 by an often deported illegal alien in San Francisco. Suggested Trump had a method and he was willing to use it to break through the media cordon on immigration. So Trump is a wild card, and he broke through in a way few people anticipated.
On social media, some big figures, major potential donors, didn't like Donald Trump, might like him because, well, for
about the perils of the injection of violence. I mean, murderous violence. Remember, people were killed on this weekend. Then it's sort of natural to rally to the victim of it, I think, and it's natural to look at the demonization of Donald Trump.
Glib Medley has a great point that Donald Trump saw some prime undeveloped issues not far from good schools, or as Steve Saylor puts it, Trump saw the $20 bill sitting on the ground. He picked it up. No other major American politician had the courage to do so.
We don't know what caused this guy to do this exactly. We don't know what kind of news he was consuming, but it's natural to look at the demonization of Donald Trump in a more negative light. But finally, I think that the Democrats' talking points in recent weeks have tended to revolve around January 6th, and the idea that the Trump or people around him or his camp constitute some sort of non-democratic threat of, upheaval or violence. And this episode sort of neutralizes that. It sort of shows that threat comes from both camps. And so I think it does give a lot of people a lot of food for thought.
Yes. And Democrats can't seem to stop themselves from using the very rhetoric that they pretend to denounce. I mean, for instance, J.D. Vance last night was immediately called by the Biden administration a far-right extremist. That's 24 hours after Joe Biden talked about calming down the rhetoric and so on. They do sound a bit ridiculous.
Well, I mean, that they feel that has been I think that Democrats feel that there are social mores.
And some obvious points about Joe Biden dropping out, right? If Joe isn't well enough to be the candidate, see on Twitter, how can he be well enough to be president? If he isn't well, how long has he been incapable of being president? Who knew he was incapacitated and hid it from the public? So if Joe Biden drops out, it's an admission of defeat and a total surrender to Donald Trump. Something clearly not going as planned at the RNC, endless house band songs, and they skipped Hulk Hogan's appearance. And a major Tel Aviv explosion that I was just playing caught on camera.
In place, which they call structures of permission, which I think allow them to shame people out of voting for Republicans. It's not really a very classy thing to do to vote for Republicans. And it has been effective for them in the past. And it's really tough to break rhetorical habits, as anyone who observes politics will see.
Donald Trump is a very superstitious man, we're led to understand, and he seems to think that his very nearest brush with death is luck or God, as he put it. Do you think perhaps he might be thinking things are going too well, as superstitious men tend to do? Because there's quite a long way to go till November still, and things are looking extremely good for him, and there might be a danger of some hubris coming in.
So another major explosion in Tel Aviv from a drone attack just past the United States Embassy. All right, sound of a drone can be clearly heard before the explosion. Let's play it from the beginning. That's a high-rise in Tel Aviv. Keep an eye on that story.
In the Republican movement at the moment about it.
I think there's hubris is an ever-present danger in politics. But yeah, if he's considering this in a superstitious way, I think it's only natural. I think everyone is sort of struck by the way this episode seemed to. I mean, everyone who remembers downloading these, the video when it happened, and it's just so. There's something that's almost. There's something almost mythic or biblical about the story, the nearness of the miss, the infinitesimal measure that would have turned that incident into something very different and absolutely horrifying. It was horrifying for the family of the man who died, but I mean, I'm talking about.
Okay, Hulk Hogan.
You know something? When I came here tonight, there was so much energy in this room. I felt maybe I was in Madison Square Garden getting ready to win another world title. Or maybe I thought the vibe was so intense, the energy was so crazy, it felt like maybe I was gonna press that no good stinky giant over my head and slam him through the mat, brother. But what I found out was I was in a room full of real Americans, brother. And at the end of the day, with our leader up there, my hero, that gladiator, we're gonna bring America back together. One real American at a time, brother. You know something? I've seen some great tag teams in my time. Hulk Hogan and, ooh yeah, the Macho Man Randy Savage. But you know something? I see the greatest tag team of my life standing upon us, getting ready to straighten this country out for all the real Americans. You know, even though you guys are real Americans, you better get ready. Because when Donald J. Trump becomes the President of the United States, all the real Americans are going to be nicknamed Trumpites. Because all the Trumpites are going to be running wild for 4 years. So with the power of Donald J. Trump and all the Trumpites running wild, America is going to get back on track. And like Donald J. Trump said, America is going to be great again.
Okay, I'll talk to you blokes later.